Resolved, the United States federal government should increase its diplomatic efforts to peacefully resolve internal armed conflicts in West Asia. Our sole contention is Biden's bridges. Increasingly, Chinese footprints have proliferated in the Middle East, but our Bala 22 evidence finds Beijing is not interested in conflict resolution initiatives, so has left the burden of conflict mediation to other countries in the region. As a result, internal armed conflicts have skyrocketed in recent years. As IIS 22 writes, as of mid-2022, the wars in Libya, Syria, and Yemen show no sign of ending. Instead, they have evolved. Mandel 22 explains, to combat escalation, there is a need for long-term strategic cooperation between regional powers. And Cohen 15 writes, cooperation is most successful when it is the form of market-to-market or people-to-people ties because it creates trusting relationships, which is the root cause for many internal conflicts in the Middle East. Fortunately, Chang 22 writes, the Biden administration is building cross-regional cooperation right now through many strategic alliances such as the West Asia Quad Alliance or I2U2. The West Quad or I2U2 is a strategic security alliance comprising of India, Israel, the UAE, and the US that launched in October 2021 with the purpose of bolstering economic cooperation. The US creating this alliance bolsters regional cooperation for two reasons. First is Israel. Berman 22 finds the current Israeli government is ideologically broad and has built important bridges to some Arab states. Specifically, Al Jazeera 22 corroborates that the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, and Jordan are some of the countries who have formed solidified ties with Israel. In the past, Israel didn't have the incentive to leverage these conflict countries for a peaceful resolution. Now it does. The Wilson Center in 2022 explains, historically, Israel felt it suffered a disadvantage in the UN and has thus developed its contemporary foreign policy strategy around its successes in smaller multilateral groups, such as I2U2. I2U2 allows Israel to uniquely establish an economic foundation and cooperate with like-minded countries. So for Israel, there's no downside. Second is India. India cemented itself as a growing security player in Asia. As Con22 writes, India has shared successful political and diplomatic talks with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iran to protect its economic interests from regional conflicts. I2U2 expands India's reach in West Asia and creates the incentive for conflict mediation. As Con continues, India is the primary facilitator and beneficiary of I2U2. I2U2 will add to India's economy through autonomous economic agreements on India's terms, rather than the terms defined by the multilateral economic forums, such as the RECP. Given these benefits, it's clear that India's approach as an international manager for the US and the Middle East will align with India's vision of strategic autonomy beyond South Asia. Put another way, every step towards India's strategic autonomy in the region brings the US closer to conflict resolution. Success is guaranteed. As Calgary's 22 writes, the Biden administration under the West Quad Alliance has placed more emphasis on developing a positive agenda for functional cooperation based on shared interests instead of driving a transparently anti-Iran or anti-China agenda as it's done in the past. Simply put, the US provides the countries in the region with the tools they need to build cooperation and trust amongst themselves. As Calgary's 22 finds, only then will the pursuit of more ambitious goals be possible. The US's I2U2 strategy in the future is to prevent security threats from arising in any region. Without cross-regional cooperation with other countries, it will be difficult for the US to mediate regional conflicts. This vulnerability makes it possible for certain countries to threaten energy supplies and allows for the proliferation of weapons. Further injecting two actors into the region is the solution, as at least 929,000 people have been killed by direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan, and a Middle East peace would directly benefit nearly 13 people. For those reasons, Alex and I are proud to affirm.
13. Wait, did you say 13 people?
Million.
I mean, he said 13 in the speech.
Oh my gosh.
We'll send case.
All right, I'll do it right now.
Thanks.
That's a brilliant case you got there.
Oh no, I'm not gonna prep.
All right.
You want to play Alto? Yeah.
All right. Okay, it should be sent.
Okay.
I just got a debate.
All right.
Shucks.
Wait, can you wait till we get case down?
Yeah, of course. I'm just gonna stand up and.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay, you're good.
All right. This shouldn't be too fast. I mean, you have a speech doc, but like, it's not gonna be like any crazy like LD stuff. All right. Palo Alto negates. Contention: what is terrorism? terrorism is down currently. The Global Terrorism Index 2021 reports that deaths from terrorism are now 59% lower than their peak. Deaths in the MENA have fallen by 87% since 2016. This is because the US is pivoting away from West Asia after 2 decades of interventions that bred terrorist threats. Paris 22 writes that the US is changing its strategy, seeking to reduce military presence in the Middle East and reorienting US foreign policy to the Indo-Pacific. The maximalist goals of regional transformation once emphasized in the Middle East is now more narrow. However, renewed diplomacy increases terror threats through aid packages. Toktamir 17 finds that aid is a powerful supporting tool in diplomacy that shapes public opinion. Aid is multifaceted. Foreign aid is used as a bribe in an effort to gain the allegiance of regional actors. Aid can be used as a carrot, especially when given to non-democratic countries to influence their stance on international issues. Aid pushes recipient states to comply with US issues. Aid may intervene in domestic politics by creating political social winners and losers by reinforcing the current situation, with one result being that the image of the USA becomes even more tarnished among the social and political losers, empirically concluding that the political losers are more likely to express negative attitudes towards the USA as aid increases, and anti-Americanism triggers terrorist recruitment. Glig 10 finds that anti-American attitudes increase the threat of terrorism. A high-status powerful group will be viewed as an imperialistic enemy. Aggression, even if preemptive, can be psychologically justified as a matter of self-defense. It has undoubtedly aided the recruitment of terrorists through passive assistance and enhances their ability to operate effectively. The SEM and IT together suggest that perceiving the United States as seeking to dominate the well-being of other nations will predict more negative reactions toward the United States. The impact is state collapse. Spikes in terrorism cause state failure and civil war. Eliab 16 writes that the presence of violent state actors in fragile states emerges as particularly conducive to state failure, and civil wars have killed thousands throughout the Middle East. Michael 18 finds that failed states are the biggest generators of humanitarian crisis and refugees. They endanger regime stability in neighboring states, and they enable access to weapons stolen from collapsed military facilities. Contention to Yemen, aggression is currently down. CON 22 finds the warring parties have not returned to the level of violence. The Houthis have refrained from launching missiles and drones across the border. Iranian support is also down. The full implications of Iran's domestic turmoil and the country's foreign policy in the Arab world have yet to be realized. But Iran's government is very much preoccupied at home. The regime needs to channel its resources towards the situation at home and become less involved in Yemen. The Houthis currently see war at a stalemate and don't want to continue. International Crisis Group 22 writes that as for the Houthis themselves, the group has long claimed that it seeks peace with other Yemenis regional powers in the world. With the wards on the approaching military equilibrium, the rivals unifying and the economy in free fall, it will be to their benefit to prove the point and at a minimum buy themselves some breathing room. Houthis see negotiation as weakness and increased attacks. MEI 22 finds that recently it's quite possible that the signals sent by the Biden administration intended to encourage the parties to return to the negotiating table encouraged some within the Houthi leadership to believe the door was open for an intensified military campaign. This emboldens the Houthis. Firestone 22 finds that President Joe Biden took 2 steps. He hoped to advance a diplomatic breakthrough in Yemen. He appointed a special envoy for the conflict and announced that the United States would throw its weight behind the UN-led diplomatic effort. Neither step has produced the desired result. Iran increased its illicit weapons supply to the Houthis over this time period to enable more lethal attacks in Yemen. The Houthis misread Biden's intentions, believing that his actions, especially pressuring Saudi Arabia to end its military operations in Yemen, would open the door for their military victory, and rather than agreeing to return to negotiations, the Houthis increased their military operations. The impact is a renewed conflict. Bull 21 finds that if Yemen continues to 2030, 1.3 million people will die. Contention 3 is China-Finland. China is currently filling in for U.S. disengagement in West Asia. Today 22 finds that U.S. said that despite a prevailing narrative of American power in West Asia being in recession, the U.S. was not abandoning the region, but many in the region believe that the U.S. checked out a while ago. Xi is going to be welcome to Riyadh. Beijing is going to be careful in building its influence in a politically volatile geography, managing the fault lines and remaining distant from getting embroiled. China is more effective at resolving regional issues and developing the region. Cuba 22 finds that China offers soft power and economic opportunities. China released its plan for achieving peace, security, and stability, stopping geopolitical rivalry in Syria, Yemen, and Libya, recognition of Palestine, Iranian non-proliferation, combating terrorism, and developing the region. As the U.S. resizes its commitment and China becomes more involved, China will uphold conflict stabilization through development, and this solves through U.S. involvement. China will better broker talks, according to Cuba 22, because it frames itself as a neutral friend to all. Chinese leadership is key to move Saudi-Iran rivalry away from war path, and Jaron 20 finds that the GCC countries are realizing they have far more to lose than the U.S. or Iran in any escalation, and this could be better facilitated by China in the region, and that's key to regional stability, as Kafira 22 finds that worsening tension can bode negatively for stability in the West Asia. And Brown University 2022 finds that at least 900,000 people have been killed by direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan due to instability. Vote Dan.
We read that impact too. All right, Dan, you ready for cross?
Yeah.
Wait, real quick, what was the tagline for C2?
C2 was Yemen.
Okay, cool.
Or C2 is here.
Yeah. Ready for cross?
Yeah, you want to stand or sit?
You can stand.
Okay, I can see. Oh, up there.
Yeah.
You don't want to wait on perceptual domain.
All right. Ready?
It's not Dan, man.
It's not the
How you doing?
So.
All right. Can I take the first question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So if I'm a farmer in the Middle East and the U.S. hands me a carrot, I just go join Al Qaeda?
No, that's not the point. The point is that when you're part of a minority group that the United States is not supporting, and
Right.
the U.S. hands the other side a carrot, then yeah, you're gonna want to do something.
Okay, but like, do you have any examples of when the U.S. sends one country a carrot and the other country
No,
not?
I mean the
And
U.S.
then
supports.
those people join Al-Qaeda.
Okay, think about like who does the U.S. support in the region, right? They support like Israel, for example, right? The other
Okay.
people in the region are not supported, and they want to do, they don't like the U.S. and Israel, and they see it
So
as part
like
of a
the
big
whole
conspiracy.
reason Israel-Palestine started is because the U.S. helps Israel?
No, but I'm saying that the U.S. giving foreign aid to some actors in the region and not others, or even in one conflict giving like aid to one group, one social group, and not another, like that creates hatred for the U.S. from the people who are the losers
So
in
then
the conflict.
can the states just fail?
Yes, because when you have losers in the conflict who feel like they're part of this grand conspiracy against them by the U.S.-Israel axis and Saudi Arabia, they're not going to like it very much, and they're going to rebel against the government who may be supporting the U.S.
Okay.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
So, what's the current like political situation in India and Israel? Like, what type of party has power? Like far right,
like
far
you
left,
can say
center?
like the Ben-Yama election, but we have two responses to that.
No, okay. Well,
First,
like, I wanted. Can you have an answer first?
Yeah.
What is the political situation? Who is ruling who's
Netanyahu
ruling?
just got elected.
Okay,
in
where
Israel.
is Netanyahu like a right-leaning? Is he
Yeah,
far right?
he's
Okay,
right wing,
yeah.
but we say like the incentives are the same.
Okay,
like,
so
India's still.
Netanyahu's right-leaning. What about India? Who like what is what is one of the big political problems right now?
I'm not sure. You can tell me though.
Okay, so then I'll just straight up ask the question.
Okay.
Like, why would like Muslim majority states be willing to like work with India when like Modi is doing like anti like Hindu nationalism and anti-Muslim sentiment at home?
Yeah, so like you can bring up that response, sure, but we say two things. One, that we'll just go for Israel, but also like that's like our first like. So,
Okay, then can we talk about Israel?
Yeah.
So what
Well,
do
actually, can I take
what
a
do
question?
most of the like
Do you
what
mind
do
if I
most of
take
the
a
states in
question?
the Middle East think of Israel?
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you mind if I take a question? Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about China. So like our evidence is pretty clear in telling you that like China has no incentives to like mediate conflict
Why?
because they're only doing it for economic.
Yeah,
interest.
exactly.
So
Can
why-
you can
So
you
like
trade?
you think China looks
no,
at
listen,
Yemen
listen,
and is
listen,
like,
listen.
let's put a bunch of money there.
Listen,
I'm all ears.
So let's say I want to like build a factory in Yemen. Can
Yeah.
I build a factory if there's like people bombing the factory?
I mean, like, what?
Can I
So, like,
so
China's-
can I build a factory
China- okay.
if people are
Then
bombing?
I'd say China just builds it somewhere else.
No, because China wants influence in the world because they want to have more trade. So in order to have more trade, which they're looking for, and more
Do they need a factory in Yemen to trade?
yeah, I mean they want to promote economic development of countries so they can
Okay.
gain large economic
Can I
allies,
take a question?
gain world influence, gain economic power.
Can I take a
Sure.
question? Okay, let's talk about Yemen.
Okay.
So, actually, no.
All right, I think cross is over. So if you want to ask a quick question,
Okay,
that's fine.
I'm good actually.
All right.
Are you doing?
What?
Zach, can you send your cards, please?
Oh yeah,
Actually, just send the cards for India and just the links.
I'll just send you. Okay.
I just said I don't care about the I just want the link cards.
Wait for India.
Yeah. For India and Israel.
Okay. Can I just send you all of it?
Whoa. Yeah, I'm reading your. I gotta read your evidence because I gotta read your evidence because I got no cards.
Yeah.
Are you gonna go get your speech? I thought you were doing. No, you can send it later.
Oh, I just sent it.
Okay. All right.
All right, am I good to
What
go?
speech?
I showed it.
Is this your clip? Is this here? Share it with me.
Yeah, sure.
You do?
Anyways, okay.
Alright, are you guys ready? Is everyone ready?
Oh, yes, 1 second.
You can believe every word that came out of your mouth, you're still voting out. Because in the long term, we solve for the entire necessity of diplomacy in the first place. We would say if you increase diplomacy in the short term, you set up regional alliances and give countries more autonomy, which then allows them to stabilize the regions for themselves, and then you don't need US or Chinese intervention in the future. We'd say in their world, at best you still have a minor presence from the United States at literally all times, meaning that they barely even solve for their impacts. And in our world, we don't need any form of diplomacy in the future, therefore solving all their problems. If you believe that diplomacy is bad, you're still voting for us. But then, as another prereq, we would say that alliances are going to be a prereq to anything else. That's what our call for evidence from K says, that we tell you have to establish alliances and stop conflict before you can prioritize anything else in a region. But now go to terror. 4 responses. First term, the only way for it to solve our terrorism is through diplomacy. Indeed, Culbertson 22 explains that preventing terrorism will require diplomacy. If you believe that military means alone will not be sufficient, co-opt their impact. The only side with any solvency is the F. The current world is rampant with terrorism, but in order to solve it, we need large-scale diplomacy. Second, turn it again. Because solving conflict is a pre-rate to terrorism. According to Bucharest 13, instability and conflict splinter societies and stir up terrorism. The affirmative solves for these conflicts at the Center for American Progress 21 explains that the Middle East requires renewed U.S. diplomatic efforts to end destructive internal conflicts in Syria and Yemen. U.S. diplomacy will prove critical to de-escalating these civil wars. The root cause of terrorism is conflict. Diplomatic efforts solve for conflict. Co-op their impact. The only side of solvency is the app. And then turn it again because affirming benefits American sentiment. The Singer 04, in order to improve America's public image, the U.S. must focus on public diplomacy, but deployed on a regional or country basis. Affirming and specifically gearing our diplomatic efforts to specific conflicts boosts American sentiments. Co-op their impact as the app decreases anti-American sentiments and therefore solves the root cause of terror. But fourth, de-link any increase in terrorism is scapegoating. Terrorists want powers. They will scapegoat any other organization. There's other countries in the region. Someone else will get blamed. Finally, de-link it again because we'd say at best all of their terrorism is anti-American terrorism. It isn't like anti-Syrian terrorism. It's not going to destabilize their country. But then going to Yemen. First off, talk about the uniqueness. We'd say that the uniqueness is fundamentally flawed. As a memo from last week explains that nothing has changed in the behavior of Saudi regime since signing on to the UN humanitarian and military truce. The truce ended December 2nd and fighting has resumed. Intervention is needed. But then they try to tell you that we would say you can turn the argument because diplomacy solves. U.S. diplomacy has worked before. As Stargate 18 writes that the U.S. diplomatic engagement around Yemen's war has made important advances. Saudi Arabia announced a proposal that offered a UN-monitored ceasefire. Co-op their impact as diplomacy solves. But now let's go into China. First, you can turn it because China's really bad. As Ahmed 22 explains, that China in recent years has offered critical diplomatic support in Iranian nuclear talks. China backs authoritarian leaders because it fuels their own agenda. They are not a better actor. Iran nuclear proliferation is terrible. Then turn the argument again because we say China actively props up authoritarian leaders. That's really crucial because when there isn't democracy in the Middle East, that's a prereq for literally every existential threat. Because when there's an authoritarian leader in progress, there's no reason to benefit the people. He's only going to benefit himself. That's really crucial because if you aren't benefiting the people, then people die. Then turn the argument again because allowing China to take over the region would destabilize the region. As Cutlass 21 finds that reducing America's role in the region and cutting ties with flawed but long-standing regional security partners would pave the way for increased engagement with Russia and China, which would likely further weaken the structural foundation of the region's state system and lead countries of the region to export more instability into the international system. The impacts they're discussing, in fact, further. But at the end of the day, you're always prioritizing our case for a couple reasons. The first is that they don't win their argument as soon as it isn't the U.S. and are doing the intervention themselves. We would say the United States policy fundamentally shifted after COVID-19, but also as a result of the I2U2 policy to the point where we aren't actually intervening in these regions ourselves, but rather using India and Israel to do it for us. That's really important because they can't actually win any of their arguments if it isn't the U.S. filling in themselves, but rather using Iran and India as proxies.
Okay. Okay, it's gonna be their overview, frontlining our case, their case. Oh, there will be an overview in between cases, just like a prereq.
Okay.
But you can flow down in their case. Is everybody ready?
On the overview, Alex tells you two things. First, that diplomacy in the short term stabilizes a region. No, it doesn't. Their diplomacy, it's bad. It's going to lead to enhanced terror. It's going to lead to worsening the situation in Yemen. That's basically our case. Secondly, they tell you that alliances are going to be formed. No, they're not. The alliances they're forming are on the backs of extremely prejudiced negotiations, which we're going to argue in their case is going to be unequivocally failures. I'll get to that, though, more in their case. Let's go to terror. They read you 5 responses, all of which I've cut, and I know they're terrible. There's a reason why we ran the contention. The first thing they tell you is that diplomacy requires terror, but that doesn't interact with any of the none of the responses interact with the warranting of terror. We're telling you that when you increase diplomacy, you increase these aid packages to these countries. And what happens when you increase these aid packages, it creates winners and losers. Those are people who get the aid and people who don't. The people who don't get the aid, that breeds anti-American sentiment, which goes into which enhances which leads them to start forming terrorist capabilities, which then leads to conflict, which leads to lots of conflict, which spills over in the region. That's none of that warranting is ever in Alex's rebuttal, and it'll lose them the round. Then go to the next turns. Then they tell you that conflict is a prereq. And as far as they're breeding more terrorism, that doesn't make sense. Third, they tell you that it actually boosts anti-American sentiment. No, and not. Again, I can see, and again, it doesn't actually breed anti-American sentiment because the card is talking about public diplomacy, but our evidence is about public diplomacy breeding anti-American sentiment. It's far more specific. Then they tell you that, oh, it's just scapegoating. Fine, but A, you need someone to scapegoat in the first place. B, again, it's not the argument. It's far more nuanced. Yeah. The last thing they tell you is that it's just anti-American and it'll stay in the region. No, it's not. That's really stupid. It's not like ISIS only attacks Americans. They sow discourse they sow unrest all around the world. Go to Yemen. Oh, well, so this leads to failed states and it spills over into conflict. Go to Yemen.
they read you two things. The first thing, that it's not changing the status quo. Their evidence is talking about Saudi Arabia. Our argument is that the Houthis are getting weaker in the status quo. That's the nuance they miss. The second thing they tell you is that diplomacy has worked in the past. That completely misses the argument. Regardless of how well diplomacy may have worked, our argument is that in the status quo, Houthis are on a path to losing the war. But if you go do negotiations now, the Houthis have empirically seen that as a sign of weakness, which leads them to start escalating their military attacks. None of that nuance or warranting is ever once interacted with. And again, I mean, it'll probably lose them. I don't know. Diplomacy hasn't worked in the past. Go to China. On the turns, they say that it's bad because we supported Iran in the deal. It's good. The Iran nuclear deal is good. It means that there's not going to be nuclear prolife. Secondly, they tell you that they prop up authoritarian regimes. No, it doesn't. China aligns itself along economic lines, and also it's not carded. It's just some random thing. Then they tell you that it's destabilizing the region. We read their evidence. One, there's no warranting given. Two, it's from a propaganda site. Let's go to their case. As an overview, if you went, or actually no, let's just go to the specific arguments. I might read it under you. At the top, they tell you that Beijing doesn't want to be in the region. A couple problems. What?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. They tell you that Beijing doesn't want to be in the region. A couple problems. First, the evidence is old. It's before Biden pulled out, which our evidence indicates is what uniquely has spread China into the region. It's from, and our evidence from 2021 indicates that China has revised a plan which postdates theirs to get more involved in the region. Secondly, oh, I can't read my handwriting. Okay, also, if we win our China argument, it's a fundamental prerequisite to their argument, because that means that impartial actors are far better than biased actors. I'll get to that more in the specific arguments. Let's go to Israel. Israel and India are probably two of the worst mediators in the region. That's because they both have terrible biases against the vast majority of the people in the region. On Israel, our evidence indicates that Israel exercises authority to privilege Jewish Israelis and discriminate against Palestinians. That means that if you grant them more diplomatic and negotiative capabilities, they're just going to use that to enhance their own credibility and their own standing, and they're just going to discriminate against the vast majority of the Middle East. That's unequivocally terrible. But then, on India, two things. First, their evidence at the top telling you that India is good at negotiations is so unbelievably misconstrued. They paraphrase it. Nowhere in the evidence they sent us does it say that. It just says that India is going to benefit. But then, secondly, you turn it against them because India is the worst actor for the region. Q17, the Middle East is 93% Muslim, and Modi absolutely hates the Muslims. That's what PBS 22 tells you. Then next, Human Rights Watch 22, the atrocities in India are increasingly using summary and abusive punishments against Muslims. Granting them more diplomatic capabilities is just going to allow them to perpetuate more crimes, which shows more disgust. That's a fundamental turn to all their impacts.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, what was it?
I muted her. Okay.
Yeah, don't.
Sorry. Yeah, it's fine.
All right, you're ready. You want to start here?
Do you mind if I take the first question?
Yeah.
Okay. If you tell me that China alongs economic barriers, how are they non-biased?
Huh?
If you tell me that China alongs itself,
I'd love to answer that question. So, China aligns itself indiscriminately with every country in the Middle East solely on economic barriers.
so they're aligning
Let me,
barriers.
can I finish my question?
Yeah. Okay.
No, but the key thing, there's a couple things. First is that it's aligning itself with every single country.
But they're not. They're aligning along economic barriers.
Yeah, but with every single country. Also,
So what about the ones that don't fit the?
no, here's the part where it's good. That's because China isn't aligning itself or isn't motivated by any, they don't have, for example, with India and Israel, they both have very strong conflicts right now going on with Muslim people.
Right, and that's how we solve, right?
How do you, if you give somebody who hates someone the power to exercise authority over them, they're just going to
No,
use their power
that's
to
not-
hate them more on a
That's not
larger
their
scale.
So we say that they're like India and Israel are divided from the Middle East right now. But we're saying that America serves as a mediator through the I2U2 program to create alliances between
Oh,
them.
so America's gonna come in and suddenly solve generations of hatred that
Is the argument that just Israel's too racist to stop conflict?
Well, it's that both of them don't like the majority groups that they're going to be trying to diplomatically engage
Israel's
with.
too racist to stop conflicts.
I mean, you're putting words in my mouth. That's a good question. Your argument on Yemen, the first response you read, is it talking about whose behavior is it talking about?
Well, so the Houthis have the vast majority of
Okay.
the violations.
That's not the question.
Sure. So
it's a pretty short
when
question.
there was The
Your
Houthis
evidence.
are the
Like,
inherently
what is?
aggressive
No,
party,
no, no,
right?
no. What is your evidence? I cut the evidence. What is your evidence talking
The
about?
fighting exists between both
No,
parties.
Alex, you read a specific country that I
No,
cut.
it was specific to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay,
but
cool.
both
You can
parties
have
are
the
still
question.
fighting. Okay.
No, but your argument. Okay.
Okay. I guess let's talk about terror.
Yeah,
So
I'm
like,
about
I'm a nice little Syrian guy, and I don't get an American aid package. Am I just gonna attack my government, like my Syrian president?
Maybe you won't, but I'd argue a lot of people will. Can I take a
Wait,
question?
but why wouldn't they like? Okay, even if you win,
Okay,
that it's
first of all,
like
first
anti-American
of all, you
terrorism.
probably should have made this argument in rebuttal. There
I
was
did.
No, you did.
That was my fifth D-Link.
No, it wasn't.
My fifth response.
No, it wasn't.
It's
You're-
on my flow.
It's on mine. You explained your fifth D-link is that this anti-Americanism stays isolated within the country.
No,
because there's no.
it's the exact opposite. It's that even if you win, that like there's another American terrorist attack, they're not just gonna attack like the Syrian government.
Okay, that's not like. First of all, you're treating terrorist groups like they're fundamentally rational. Secondly, empirically, with things like Al Qaeda and ISIS, I mean, they indiscriminately attack.
Your link is anti-American
No.
sentiment.
Because anybody who doesn't align with their beliefs is considered an enemy. That's gross.
Hey, you want a hug?
Dude, I would love it. Zach, you want a hug? If you don't, we're gonna hug, dude.
Alright. The order is gonna be like an overview, our case,
Like a different overview or the
no,
overview?
same overview.
Okay.
Yeah. And then their case. And it might be a little fast. Wait,
Do this speech.
no. Okay. Remember what our opponents tell you throughout the round that stabilization is the most important voter in this round. Prefer us in long term, as many bilateral agreements allow these countries to gain their own autonomy, creating a domino effect across West Asia, granting them the unique opportunity to solve for all of their own region's conflicts in the future. But then, let's go to our case proper. First, look to our Cone 15 evidence. Cooperation is most successful when it's region to region, because that's what creates trusting relationships, which is why our Chang 22 evidence is key, explaining with Biden's strategic shift exemplified by the I2U2 agreement, forming multilateral agreements with regional actors to solve conflicts and bolster economic cooperation. They place a few responses here. First, they tell you that this was like all of our China evidence is before the Biden pullout, but we see the incentive is the same. China's not just going in there to mediate, they don't interact with the warranty at all, they're only there for economic incentives. They see that themselves, but then they give a prereq that China's better, but once again, they only have economic incentive, they have no incentives to mediate, whereas Israel does. But then go to the specific links. We're collapsing on Israel, they place one response here, they tell you that both countries have bias. This doesn't really make sense, but also to the extent where Israel's actively forming agreements now with UAE and Bahrain, even with their new leader, they're like completely drop all the recency here. But then, so then let's get to weighing. So remember our Israel evidence, that's what we're going for. You're gonna prefer this on probability, as Israel had never before been put in this situation. A, being put as the front runner of negotiation efforts, but B, now being ideologically broad and granted new incentives of economic cooperation enabled through Biden's new diplomatic strategy. It's clear that our link is the most probable at triggering in the status quo. That's really important because their link makes no sense. Either way, China fills in on terror, so that doesn't make any sense. And also they say the Houthis are only gonna fight back, like if the US gets involved, they're not just gonna let them lose, but I'll get to that on their case. And we're dropping India, but quickly I'll answer the turn. They tell you that Moody's really bad. However, to the extent where he's literally having successful agreements with Jordan, UAE, and Bahrain, we say there's no change and the incentives are the same. Their turn doesn't give them any offense. But then go to their case. Extend the overview once again on their side of the case. They tell you that like no, it doesn't. It doesn't solve for all the long term, but there's like literally no warranting and the new actors injected by Israel. That makes a ton of sense. But then extend the prereq that alliances are key. This is our Calabrese evidence. That solves for every single thing in this round. They tell you that alliances are stable, but they literally don't give you any warranting and rebuttal. But then go to the thing, go to their link. They try to tell you it's because of foreign aid, but we're going to give a prereq. We'd say that the whole reason terror happens is because of instability. So if you increase regionalism, that solves for all instability in the future, meaning we cut off terrorism at its root. The link's really bad. But then fourth, there's a contradiction. They tell you that terrorists will fight anyone, so we argue even if China fills in, their link of terror still triggers. It's absolutely non-unique. But fifth, another prereq, regional alliances would have solved all of Yemen in the first place, so we call up all of their impacts on Yemen, but also their defense makes no sense. They tell you that the Houthis are only going to escalate if there's US presence, so they're just going to get rolled over unless the US is there. That makes no sense. Don't evaluate. They have no link. But then go to China. Extend another prereq that tells you that our case prevents any need for China fill in, as Israel should be preferred because one, they're expanding now, two, they have more broad views. That's the recency that goes absolutely dropped in every single speech. But Calabrese says these alliances are forming now. But then they tell you that China has economic incentives that literally concedes that there will be no mediation. It's a really clear AF ballot.
Alright, I think we're out. We're out? I got this. Don't worry, bro. Alright, is everyone ready? Second sound. I'll start on like this overview about alliances, and then I'll go to our case, then I'll go to Biden's bridges. Alright. Yeah, Biden's bridges. Alright. Alright. Okay, so they try to respond to everything basically by saying that there's going to be regional alliances. This is going to solve back for everything. First of all, they say that terrorist root causes instability, but terrorists create the instability because the terrorists are so angry at America and other people in the region because they become more and more extreme. This is what actually creates the instability because you can't actually have a stable government when you have terrorist attacks. So actually, terrorism prereqs the state instability. Instability doesn't cause terrorism. Now they say alliances like are going to magically solve all the instability. Regional alliances have never worked. Like the GCC never worked. The GCC literally invaded Yemen. It was literally a Saudi-led GCC coalition that invaded Yemen. Alliance, like regional organizations have always failed because everyone in their region hates each other. That's all we've been talking about in India and Israel, that there's so much like hatred in the region that regional alliances aren't actually going to work. The only one who's actually going to work is China, who's a neutral mediator because, okay, and now let's, so that's the alliances. Now let's go on to terrorism. So first, they try to say that alliances are going to solve this. Like this isn't actually, this isn't actually explained. How do alliances solve terrorism? The entire root cause of terrorism is that the uniqueness is that the U.S. has exited the region and terrorist attacks are currently going down. The warning is that when you give foreign aid to some groups but not others, this incentivizes anti-American sentiment among the discriminated groups, which leads them to join terrorists. These terrorist attacks are outside the realm of the law. Alliances don't actually solve because the terrorists hate America and hate other countries in the region. It's not that they're going to hate anyone, it's that they're going to hate anyone who's allied with America, and America is going to make them extreme, and extremists hate different groups. This is the only actual link chain in this like contention. Also, state collapse is a prereq to their diplomacy because you need a state to do with diplomacy. India and Israel can't actually negotiate with anyone if there's no state. India and Israel can't actually negotiate with terrorists. Like it's almost impossible to negotiate with terrorists. State collapse is a prereq to diplomacy. Now on Yemen. Right now, Houthis are on a path to losing, but if we negotiate with them too early, negotiate specifically, not military aid, if we negotiate with them too early, they see it as weakness because they see that we're trying to negotiate means we want to get out of the war, we're losing. You need to wait till the Houthis are defeated completely before they be willing to negotiate. You need to wait till they raise the white flag, then they'll be willing to negotiate. Otherwise, they see it as weakness and they actually increase tensions. And the empirics of this were never actually responded to in the round because the warranting is conceded. Remember that absent U.S. involvement, 1.3 million people are saved. They see preferred probability, that sides with us because empirically, negotiations have led to increased violence. This is the only empiric in this round, as opposed to like some random stuff about alliances in India and Israel. Like now talking about China fill-in, like we are not going for this, but either way, China's economic incentives mean they're willing to ally with everyone in the region. Now on the first contention about Biden's bridges, they talk about India and Israel by saying that the UAE and Bahrain, like they did deals with the UAE and Bahrain. This doesn't really mean anything because the UAE and Bahrain are like the richest countries in the region and also like the most neutral like countries in the region. They're like the least extremes. Like okay, Israel's gonna do deals with them, but that doesn't actually have any indications for the rest of the region. In order to be a successful mediator, you need to not be biased and you need to be able to work with anyone in the region, and they haven't proven that Israel's actually going to be able to work with some of the other states in the region like Assad, Syria, Iraq, terrorist groups, etc., which is literally going to be impossible for them to do because they have such large anti-Muslim sentiment. In fact, it's going to increase the anti-American sentiment because it's this I2U2 alliance. It's this Israel, like American alliance that hates Muslims. They're not going to be able to solve any impacts. The only way we're going to actually be able to solve is through China and through like not being in the region.
Y'all can skip Grand if you want to, I don't care.
I kind of want to do
Yeah,
Grand.
we can do that.
Sorry, there I am.
Okay.
Yeah, can I give you a hug during Grand?
Yeah. Oh, facts.
All right, ready, guys?
Yeah.
No, we're already in it.
Oh, we're in Grant?
Dude, we're doing it. This is a
All
great.
right,
Okay.
you guys want your question?
Yeah, can I ask the first one?
Sure.
No.
Okay, so Dan, let's talk about this prereq you need, or
Yeah.
you read on terrorism. You say that terrorists create instability. So like,
Yeah.
if is a terrorist group just gonna like form in America and attack the entire country because we're stable?
Wait, is a terrorist group? Well, I mean,
You
yeah,
have
there's
to
literally
say
far-right
that.
extremism in the U.S. right now. So
Okay.
Also,
the uniqueness like
also,
is
the
Okay.
idea
Okay.
that terrorism is only started by instability is unequivocally false. The internal links on our case are telling that aid specifically leads to anti-American sentiment, which leads to terrorism. That's absent instability.
Yeah.
So it's not the only
Like,
cause.
Also,
Oh,
terrorism.
okay.
So terrorism.
I smell
Like terrorism
bullshit.
occurs.
Yeah.
Like, okay, exactly. Like empirics just prove this not
Drop
true.
this out of
Like terrorism occurs in so many stable countries, like the Oklahoma City bombing, like or like Sandy
Okay.
Hook.
Yeah, you can take
Like,
your
do
question.
you think that that's not like The U.S. is not a stable country.
I don't really know if school shootings are terrorism, but you can take a question.
School shootings are not terrorism? Okay, fine. Then what Oklahoma City bombing
You
is,
can take a question.
that was in a stable country.
Can you take a
Alright,
question?
let's see. So like, on Yemen, right? Like, that's actually not what we're talking about Yemen. Let's talk about like Israel. So
Okay.
like, okay,
Wait,
why?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. That's fine. That's fine.
Actually, no,
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
he's
like,
gonna troll.
how does Israel, like, doing agreements with UAE and Bahrain, like, mean they're gonna be able to do agreements with, like, Syria and, like, the
Yeah,
Houthis and
because
stuff?
like, are you on it? Are you?
Well, I just wanted to say that was new in summary.
Yeah. That was new in summary that like they're the richest country and they're neutral and stuff.
Because it was a new response.
No,
It
it
was a new response
wasn't.
in first
It was
summer.
out of case.
So that's
No,
not like,
it was
that's,
not.
that's like an analysis. Not even that.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't think
that's
anyways,
analytic.
like,
It's not
also like the warranting just like doesn't really make sense.
Why?
Because you're saying that like, just because like, even though they've had agreements with 3 new countries, like there's no precedent. Like,
Yeah,
that
but it's
doesn't really
like,
make
okay.
any sense. And like also you keep saying like China's not biased, but like they absolutely are. Like they're literally only doing it for economic incentives.
Yeah, exactly. That means they're not biased.
So we
Because
say,
every country
okay.
offers, okay, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Can I ask you a follow?
No, do you mind
If-
if I respond?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so to the extent where you literally say that China's only there for economic incentives, we'd say they also have no incentive to conflict mediate because they only want the economic benefits, so China's not the better mediator.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
So would you say every country has some form of economic opportunities?
sure.
So
Do you mind
Okay,
I
so
take the
if every country has some sort of economic opportunity,
All right,
does
you-
that mean China
you've
wants
asked
to
3
ally with
questions.
every
Can I take
country?
a question?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so let's talk about Yemen. So like your whole warranting or link with Yemen is that the Houthis are gonna just let themselves lose now.
They're not
But if
letting
the
themselves-
US,
letting
but if the
themselves
US
lose.
increases,
Hold on, let me finish.
right, but they're only gonna escalate if the US increases to like
Yeah,
diplomacy.
because if
Yeah.
the
So
US
like they're just
increases
gonna let themselves
diplomacy,
lose?
No,
listen,
that's
listen,
not
listen,
right.
listen.
No, wait, no.
Okay. No, can I, okay.
They're on the path to losing the status quo. Empirically, when we've tried to negotiate with them, they've taken that as a sign of weakness, and they've greatly ramped up and escalated their attack.
So
right now, let's
because
say
they're losing,
No, no,
they're
no,
just
hold
gonna
on.
let themselves lose unless the US comes in.
No, they're not. They're losing, but they're gonna like.
They're not losing, they're trying to win.
No,
But
Okay, that's for us.
We have a minute 25 up there.
Can you any extension?
I got it.
Just rewrite it.
That's correct. The order's gonna be starting on our case and then on their case, weighing in between. And I'll start on the overview on their case. But like when I'm on their case.
Yeah.
Start on our case, the easiest place to vote is on our first subpoint about Israel. What we tell you is that through I2U2, US is mediating alliances between Israel and other countries, effectively using Israel as a proxy in the Middle East. That's really crucial because right now Israel is incredibly ideologically broad and has already started making alliances with multiple countries, including Bahrain, Egypt, etc. That's really crucial because when we give more countries more autonomy and create more alliances, that solves back for every other problem and the root cause need for diplomacy in the first place. They give you a few responses. First, they tell you that UAE and Bahrain are rich, which is brand new new in summary, we say don't evaluate it. Then they try and tell you that it proves that it proves that they're not going to ally with everyone, but to the point where they're already making a bunch of alliances with a bunch of people, and it only goes up when you affirm because the U.S. is investing more in diplomacy. We say we solve back. Then they say that China solves, but we say that they concede our evidence that tells you that the best alliances are regional alliances because they're people to people and region to region. But they lose their round when they drop the probability ring. Where we tell you that specifically in the status quo, given that Israel's in a unique position and are currently ideologically broad, it is the most probable link. When they concede this, they concede that we have the higher probability and that we have a prerequisite to their entire case, which means that you can't even evaluate their case. But go on to their case. Extend the overview where we tell you that when you increase diplomacy in the short term, you stabilize countries in the long term, therefore solving back for the root cause of diplomacy. Because if there's no need for diplomacy, we don't send any aid, there is no terror. When we solve back for diplomacy, right, regions solve themselves, and it doesn't breed instability in Yemen, and it doesn't cause China to fill in. We say that when in the long term you actually stabilize these regions, they have no offense, but then extend the Calabrese overview where we tell you that alliances have to come first. That's never goes disputed because alliances have to, you have to have a stable government before you can address anything else. Then go on to see one about terror. Remember that prereq about aid? I tell you there's no need for aid if the region's stable, but then remember they try and tell you that even if China is filling in, they can see that terrorists are going to attack China anyways. Then they try and tell you that state collapse is a prerequisite, but A, that's new in summary, but B, we'd say that regional stability solves state collapse. Finally, they try and tell you that GCC is bad because invaded Yemen, also new, don't evaluate it. Then the Houthi argument is really silly. They're not just going to let themselves loose on China, extend the prereq about how there's not need for filling with regional alliances. Vote off the 13 million.
Classic line. Vote off
Like terrorism.
Can you write it at the bottom?
We can't do time. Here, I'll put it up. It's fine. Here, I have it.
Always goes back.
He's gonna go like that.
Here, I put it as the number 2.
Okay,
See it? This one?
yeah, alright, it's terrorism, Yemen, Israel, where?
You're on for both.
Hey,
Just go. I have to submit my ballot.
sorry.
No, deadass, they sent me an email.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll make this 2 minutes. On terrorism, the warranting evidence and empirics are absolutely conceded out of rebuttal. They try to come back with this prerequisite instability analysis. It's terrible. Neither are true. Our argument is literally that that aid breeds instability independent of, or breeds terror independent of instability. And secondly, on the alliances thing, they can't solve for terrorism. That's just silly. And terrorists are inherently outside of the law. They're not going to listen to these regional organizations. Secondly, this idea of this aid prereq is a brand new response that they're framing as a prereq and final focus. Absolutely don't evaluate it. It was in absolutely none of the other speech. This is the largest threat in the region because remember that the terrorists getting control leads to state collapse. State collapse is a prerequisite to their diplomacy and all of their arguments because you need a state to do diplomacy in the first place. India and Israel can't negotiate with these terrorists or these unstable states if there's absolutely no states in the first place. Yeah, and then remember that terrorism right now is low in the United States because it's the United States pulling out its presence, but however, diplomacy through the form of aid sows instability because it creates winners and losers. The losers turn to terrorism in order to feed back, and then that leads to instability, which again is a prerequisite to their case on Yemen. Remember that right now the Houthis are going to lose in the long run, but negotiations are taken as a sign of weakness, and they see it as an opportunity for them to win since the U.S. is showing them that they want to end the conflict early and leave their region. They believe that the United States will be pulling funds. No, don't worry about that. Remember that the Houthi conflict, which again, all that evidence and analysis was never once touched in any single speech. It's the cleanest place for you to sign your ballot because it'll save 1.3 million people if the current course of trajectory is left unchanged. On Israel, their argument is fundamentally not true. All of the examples they've cited are from countries that are wealthy and aren't as ideologically opposed. Israel's going to have to negotiate with countries who share these same ideologies as the people that they're subjugating, the Palestinians in their own country, which means that we would argue Israel is a terrible mediator in the region. That's the turn that I read you in my rebuttal. Dan extended in his summary, and the warranting has never once actually been touched. They tell you that they're ideologically broad. We give you specific examples of how they're absolutely, unequivocally not. Oh, last thing on this probability wing, it absolutely was not conceded. We talked about how if you really want to talk about probability, you should vote for the empirics. And empirically, when the United States has increased its aid, it's led to anti-American sentiment. That was in Dan's summary. That was not conceded. Or again, remember, terrorism leads to state collapse, which is a prerequisite. Again, you would know.
That was like 8 seconds ago.
Yeah,
Good round, guys.
yeah.
Good job.
Just give me a second. Alright, okay, I have a decision.
Alright, let's sit down.
Okay, cool. Y'all did not make it easy, but this was a fun round of jokes, so it's fine. So I end up negating, and honestly, I was not super comfortable negating either. And the reason for that is because all of this, like, all of the prereqs, link-ins, and like most of the weighing comes in the like extreme back half of the round, which makes it extremely confusing at the same time. So when I just look at it, right, it's like, it's kind of, there's a lot of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of going on, which is like, kind of confusing, but if I'm just looking at terrorism, right, the terrorism argument is that when US increases aid, it favors one side, people get mad, everyone gets fucked, terrorism happens. That's basically the link that gets extended throughout. Even if I don't care about like how solving for terrorism is a prereq to diplomacy, I think that in general, this link in itself is pretty clean. I think that like the defense that comes on this link about how like, or like any response about how like regionalism solves for terrorism in the first place, or like anything on those lines kind of goes out the door when like you don't interact with the fact that like US aid increases, which is like what they're fiating, like US aid increases when you affirm, which means that terrorism happens. And I feel like on that level, like the link is extremely clean. I think it becomes very confusing when like these arguments come in about how like regionalism solves for terrorism in the first place. But like if you really think about it, and this is, I didn't intervene here, but because like it didn't really go to the very end of the round. But if you think about it, like what is regionalism solving if like affirming gives aid in the first place, right? Because the argument is that the moment you give aid, this like bad sentiment is immediately triggered, which means it's like gonna cause terrorism in the first place. And then there's also, they're right, there's really no implication as to like how regionalism actually solves. You kind of just say that, like regionalism leads to stability overall. Yeah. I honestly, like Yemen, like sure, you win Yemen, but again, it's not weighed. No one really cares about Yemen throughout the round. Like they just keep going for Yemen. Honestly, you would have been better off if you dropped it, but I know you probably went for it as like a safe bet. Yeah. On Israel, right? So here's the deal about Israel. I don't know if you win Israel or not, and the reason for that is because like a lot of the back and forth happens between second summary and final focus, and actually between summaries and final focus itself. Like I do understand that like I'm pretty sure you did say it in case about how like Israel is like becoming ideologically better and like broad views and stuff like that, and you go hard for it. But I feel like they are allowed to respond when you bring up these examples of like UAE, Bahrain, and things like that, because I don't know if those were in case. Regardless, I think that like if I'm looking at this on like the probability weighing, right? Like first of all, I don't think probability weighing is even weighing. I think it's just defense, right? But regardless, I think that like both teams have the probability. Like if you look at it, I just think that like the Israel argument is super muddled, and the terrorism argument is not that muddled. If we look at the overview, there is no real implication of the overview onto any argument in the round, which means that like I'm not sure. Like okay, maybe there is an implication when you give a regionalism response on like any sort of diplomacy or stability, but I think that like the implications kind of go out the door, and it just becomes a chicken fight as to like who can win the overview. But I don't necessarily know if I buy the overview, because not only was there like a lot of just like they said that, no, that doesn't make sense, here's why, without much interaction overall as to like what the warranting of each response was. Because I like the interactions were like fine until the back half of the round, and I think that like honestly like it could also have just been like you could have probably said something and I just didn't catch it. Like that is probably something that went on with the overview, because honestly I was kind of confused half the time. But okay, and then on this prereq to diplomacy, I think like even if this is late, like I think I still vote neg, even if I don't look at terrorism being a prereq to diplomacy. But if I do look at terrorism being a prereq to diplomacy, which was in like summary at least, which is like very late, second summary, which is very late, but like I'll still probably count it for weighing. I think that like Also, yeah, probably should have been a rebuttal. But I think that like it's still kind of just like a final like giveaway to terrorism, you know? Not even giveaway. I don't know what fucking it is. But like it's like the final thing that like gets me to vote for terrorism. It's like a confirmation that like yes, I agree that I feel like there was a lot of clash on terrorism. There's not a lot of clash on the link level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which makes it like, cause like that is how cause like I don't know if it's interventionist. I don't think it is, but I just looked at what was extended, and then I looked at what defense or offense was on the extended argument, and all I saw was like the aid extension, and then I saw what was said on the aid extension, because that's the case, and then I just like, oh, like here's how it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that a fair RFD?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Any
Thank you,
questions?
Judge.
I'm
No,
looking for
that's-
questions.